All right. To quote one of my favorite shows, are we live on the internet? I
We're
think
live.
I think we are. Welcome everybody to tonight's one-on-one interview with the chair. We are privileged to have our sitting representative, Ben McAdams. Glad to have him here with us. And stay tuned tomorrow because we get to meet one of our hopefuls, Jenna Rakita. So watch for that tomorrow. But tonight we get to talk the meat and potatoes that is Washington. So, but I don't know if everybody knows your background, Ben. So if you wanted to take a quick minute and just kind of give the highlights of where you've served in public office and what you've accomplished as you've done so, I'd love to have a little bit of the rundown.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Great to see you. Great to be with everybody here today. And so I'm Ben McAdams, born and raised here in Utah. I actually grew up in West Bountiful, Utah in Davis County, and went to, my mother's a school teacher. My parents divorced when I was a teenager, but so my mother raised 6 kids on school teacher salary, and so we oftentimes were struggling as kids, and thankfully received help from Bishop Storehouse and from our church to help cover some of the expenses, and we were able to get by. And then I went to college, went to the University of Utah, and after the University of Utah, which is where, I met my wife in high school. We were good friends in high school. We dated and got married when I was finishing at the University of Utah. And then we both served missions. So I was a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Brazil, and my wife served in Vienna, Austria. And after we got back, we were friends actually at that point. After we got back, we started dating and got married my senior year. She had already graduated. She was actually in law school at BYU when we got married. And I wanted an out-of-state experience. So we then moved to New York City, where we both finished our law degrees at Columbia Law School, and stayed out there in New York for a few years to practice law, and then moved back to Utah when our twins were born, and we were anxious to be close to family with our twins. And so moved back to Utah, where I was working for a law firm here. And then in 2009, I was elected to the Utah State Senate, where I served a term in the state Senate, and then went on to work ran for mayor of Salt Lake County and was elected in 2012. And then and did that for 6 years, and then was elected to Congress in 2018. So I'm currently running for re-election to Congress.
And we are glad to have you, I have to say. I feel like you're doing a good job representing this district and handling all the different opinions and viewpoints that are inherent with the mix of communities we have. So one thing that I was curious about, because state senate's one thing, county mayor's another thing. What was the biggest surprise for you as you started out on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I mean, I really loved both serving in the Utah State Senate and serving as mayor of Salt Lake County. And one of the things that I think we do well here in Utah is we put partisanship aside and we work to solve problems. And so really it was a satisfying opportunity to address some really difficult topics that we worked on, like transportation and investing in our roads and bridges and our infrastructure. Also addressing homelessness was one of the priorities that I worked on when I was mayor. Homelessness and addiction, and helping to get people back on their feet, to get resources they need to overcome addiction, to get back on their feet. And so we worked hard on that, and found that we were able to work in a bipartisan way, Republicans and Democrats, putting really party aside and putting people first. And through that, we were able to help a lot of people who were in some pretty dire circumstances to get back on their feet and to get another chance in life. And what we found is the way we did it, we also ended up saving tax dollars, because it's much cheaper to have people become self-reliant and independent and able to take care of themselves instead of perpetually in a homeless shelter or a jail or needing to rely on those services for to survive. And so as we help people, we saw people lift themselves up. We opened the doors and people lift themselves up and walk through those doors, and we're able to thrive. And it's good for the individual, it's good for families, but also good for the taxpayer. I think the biggest surprise then getting to Washington is frustrating to me is how partisan it is. And so many people there are going to judge an idea or a bill or a concept based on the party of the person who sponsors it. And it's just too partisan. And I think too many people put party ahead of problem solving. And so one of the first things that I did when I got to Washington was join a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. In order to join the problem solvers, you have to find somebody from the opposite party and you join together. And so that, already you're reaching out, you're building relationships, you're finding somebody who also wants to work on addressing challenges rather than dividing. And you join together. So the Problem Solvers group that I belong to now, there are 50 members. It's 25 Republicans and 25 Democrats. And we meet at least weekly, oftentimes more than that. And we just talk through some of the difficult issues. And it's so enlightening, I think, to see a problem or a bill through the eyes of somebody from different part of the country, different perspective, different political background, and recognize that we all are working together to solve the same problem. But we have different ideas about how to do that. And because we have different ideas and we share those ideas and respect each other's perspectives and opinions, I think it's enlightening, and we learn and become better. And we've been able to break the logjam on numerous key issues and move them forward. And so, you asked what my biggest shock was or perception was when I got to DC was how partisan it can be and how much Washington needs bridge builders and problem solvers and people who are going to put problem solving and solutions ahead of partisan politics. And that's who I've been and who I've tried to be as a member of Congress over the last 2 years. Bring this experience that I had from Utah as a mayor working to solve problems and take that approach and commitment to DC.
Well, especially coming from that background of, the East Side being very Democrat, the West Side being very Republican. And so you really had to learn to find that common ground that everyone could agree on. Mm-hmm. When we were growing up, because we're about the same age, I remember thinking how Congress often put forward these bills that neither side really liked. And that was a good bill, because if both sides gave something so they didn't quite like it entirely, you'd found the common ground. So,
well, we find ourselves right now, right now with this COVID pandemic and the crisis. And a lot of people are really struggling. There's a lot of hardship and people are really frustrated. I know a lot of families that are worried about how they're going to make their mortgage payment or their rent payment. Businesses that are struggling to keep, small businesses, these are restaurants or hair salons, and they're worried about how they're going to keep their doors open. They were harmed by the shutdown, and now many of them are open again, but they're not at 100%. They're struggling to keep their head above water, and they're looking to Washington to throw a life preserver to help stabilize the economy, to help to slow the spread of this virus, to help people who are really hurting right now. And what you've seen from both sides, honestly, Republican and Democrat, is people digging in their heels, not willing to budge, and I think putting partisanship ahead of people. And we need people who are going to, again, recognize neither side is going to get entirely what they want. There's going to have to be some compromise. There's going to have to be some willingness to take something that maybe isn't 100% of what one side wants or 100% of the other and meet in the middle, because the American people need us to be above partisanship, to be above politics, and to just do what's right.
So this group that you're a part of, would you say it gives you hope?
Yeah, I would say it gives me hope. I want to acknowledge the immense frustration. We are at a time in this country where we are incredibly divided, and there is plenty of blame to go around on both sides of the aisle for the divisions we face, for the controversy we see. And the divisions we see on the evening news amongst the American people that you see on Facebook and Twitter, that I was going to say it bubbles up to Congress, but maybe it trickles down from Congress. But Congress is a reflection of what we're seeing around the country, whether it's the cause of it or a reflection of it, I don't know. But we're seeing that same divisiveness in Congress. And so that makes me sad when I see how divided we are. And when I see people trying to divide us because it works in their political advantage, I think you see a lot of people who division and anger and frustration, you can fundraise off of that. You can win elections off of that, depending on your district. And that saddens me because I want to come back from that. I want to be part of healing from that. But yeah, what gives me hope is seeing that there are good people who are committed to dialing down the controversy, who are committed to healing, to recognizing that there are good ideas on both sides of the aisle, and we can be better than that, that the American people, the Constitution, this country expects us to be better than that. There are good people on both sides. And so it does give me a glimmer of hope amongst a lot of the controversy and disappointment we see in our rhetoric on social media and from members of Congress from both parties today.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. I know my wife has struggled. Her family's very partisan and doesn't really take well to our stance because we are diametrically opposite on a lot of things. And so if we can have healing in Congress, then I have hope for my wife and her family and for me and my family. But you bring up COVID, and I was reading the news. We have two of our big hospitals here in Utah that were having to have a surge ICU, that they were so full in the intensive care unit of COVID patients, they had to expand the ICU to be able to take care of more. And they're running short on staff and they're running long hours, which means our medical professionals are probably seeing a weakened immune system and putting themselves even further at risk, which is concerning for me because, I've got asthma, so I'm at risk. My parents are both over 60. They're at risk. And so it's very much on my mind. So for you, as someone who actually had COVID and seeing all this now, what's your take and what can we do as a state, or can you do in Washington to help get this under control?
Yeah, well, you mentioned I had COVID and I got sick with the virus really when it was first hitting. So remember back in the week that I think we all kind of got this splash of cold water in the face, where the first thing that I think was a wake-up call to me was, we had heard about it and been aware that this was out there and was something to be concerned about. But when it was when the NBA announced that they were canceling their season. And that was, I think, on a Wednesday. On Friday, I think it was on that same Wednesday that one of the Murray School District in Utah had sent their kids home from school. And then it was on Friday of that same week that all Utah schools canceled school for an indeterminate period of time then. And so it was on Saturday of that same week that I started feeling sick. It was mild at first. Sunday was kind of mild. Monday, it started getting worse. I woke up Tuesday morning and I felt it like I was on the Today Show, and I described it as that I had a belt around my chest, that it was just tight and I couldn't breathe without some effort. And it was at that point that I called my doctor. I had called my doctor previously and he said that my symptoms were mild. He said, remember, that's when testing was scarce, and so they were saving the tests for the worst cases. And my symptoms, he said, it wasn't inconsistent with COVID, but they were mild, and it could be a cold, it could be several of things. And so he said that I didn't warrant a test at that point, but I should let him know if my symptoms got worse. So by Tuesday morning, when I was having difficulty breathing and felt that tightness in my lungs, he recommended that I go and get a COVID test, which I did. And on Wednesday, it came back positive. I was at that point feeling as sick as I've ever felt. I had a fever of 103 degrees. I was still working, trying to power through it, working from home, of course, and with Zoom and conference calls and that, but powering through it, and then would crash in the evenings and felt just really, really sick. And so it was Friday night. I powered through a full week of work and went and just crashed in bed Friday evening, 5 o'clock or so. Got up around 6 o'clock to, got up and walked across the bedroom and I was out of breath. Felt like I was panting, trying to catch my breath and couldn't catch my breath. Felt like I just run a race and was a little bit lightheaded, and went back and laid down and called my doctor to describe those symptoms. And he was at that point very worried because that meant that I wasn't getting enough oxygen in my blood, and told me to immediately get myself to the emergency room. So I followed his advice and checked into the emergency room. They did checked my blood oxygen level, and my blood oxygen levels were low. They were in the low 80s, and they were worried that it could get worse. And so they put me in the ICU. I spent actually a couple of days in the ICU. At that point, I kind of stabilized, but if they ever took me off oxygen, they would see my levels plummet again, and my fever was still very high, and they wanted to keep me there until they were worried that they'd seen people take a dramatic turn for the worse, and they just didn't know which direction mine was going to go. So I ended up spending 8 days in the hospital, struggling to breathe. It's the sickest I've ever been. In those 8 days that I was in the hospital, I lost 13 pounds. So if anybody's looking for a diet plan, it's not a diet plan I would recommend. I would tell you there got to be better ways to lose weight, because I just felt awful. And actually didn't have any, I was getting a lot of text messages and posts on Facebook and Twitter and that of people wishing me well. They had heard that I was in the hospital, and I didn't even have the energy to respond. So as I was leaving the hospital, I'm feeling a little bit better. I was still pretty sick, and they wanted me to go home and quarantine. But as I was leaving the hospital, I recorded a quick little video to post to social media, just saying that I was doing better, was being discharged from the hospital, and thank everybody for the outpouring of love and support that I'd received. I looked back at that video, and I just looked emaciated, like I'd just been hit by a truck. It was awful.
That's what I thought when I saw it.
Yeah. So a lot of people commented they saw how bad it looked. And so it took me, after I went home, it took me a couple of weeks to really get back on my game. So I would say COVID knocked me out for about 5 weeks, and just felt off for about 5 weeks. And so the first thing I would say to people is, having had COVID myself, now I'm 45 years old. I actually don't have any other health conditions or any risk factors. I exercise every day. I take multivitamins every day, and generally pretty healthy. And it hit me really, really hard. And there were some scary times in the hospital that and really left my family pretty worried that you don't know how this virus is going to hit you. And so my advice, first of all, would be to take it very seriously. And even if your case is mild, certainly overwhelming majority of people who have COVID will recover and not have lasting consequences. But our death rate's around 1%, and more than that of people who have symptoms that last with them for quite a while. That, if you just do the math, that's a lot of people, and it's a lot of numbers. And so, even if you are going to have a mild case and be okay, you don't know who you might infect. You don't know what the impact will be on them. Daniel, you talk about your parents, and I actually thought about someone who I thought a lot about was a woman who's in our LDS congregation, our ward, who's everybody loves her. She's 104 years old, and she's just this sweet lady who is doing so well and always has so much energy in that. And it was about a week before I got sick that I had seen her and given her a hug and talked to her and talked to her at church. And I know now that you're really only contagious about 48 hours before you have symptoms. And the last time I had seen her was about a week before I had symptoms. It was probably before I had even contracted the virus. So she was never at risk, but it certainly weighed heavily on my mind about whether she was going to come down with it and what that would mean for her. And I didn't want to be the one who had given it to her. And so I would say to people, you don't know who you're going to infect and what the consequences will be on them, and you don't want that on your conscience. So our governor and our public health officials have given us some pretty basic guidelines that are pretty simple. Certainly, I don't like to wear a mask. I don't think anybody likes to wear a mask, but if that can reduce transmission, it's certainly not 100. You're not going to reduce it by 100%, but if that can reduce transmission by 75%, or what the estimate is, but that's significant. And if we all do that, then we're going to significantly cut down on the risk of people getting it, of it spreading. And so, Daniel, you started off, sorry for this lengthy answer, but you started off talking about the hospitals and what we're seeing right now with hospitalization. And our emergency rooms are in 2 hospitals and growing, filled to capacity. And that's kind of scary. So I want to tell you about a friend of mine, Stephanie. Now, Stephanie's sister had a heart attack. She's 49 years old and had a heart attack last week. And kind of scary, she's, and Stephanie's really worried about that. So they called the ambulance and they took her to the hospital, but it was clear that she was going to need some specialized care. And in that circumstance, you need it quickly, right? Well, they could not find an emergency room that would take her. And so, you never know, you may not be at risk of COVID, but, she had a heart attack, and COVID and what COVID's done to our hospitals impacted her. So you don't know if you're going to get in a bike accident, a car accident, have a heart attack. But if with our hospitals at the levels that they are, that presents a risk to all of us. If you have the need to go to the hospital, what are you going to find there? And as you mentioned, our healthcare workers are really overworked. I often think back when we talk about this virus, I think back about the healthcare workers, the doctors and the nurses who took care of me and put their lives at risk caring for me as I had a virus and was contagious. And they were always careful to come in with the protective gear and masks and gloves and everything. But there's certainly a risk in caring for me, and how grateful I was that somebody would do that when I couldn't take care of myself, and they would come in and take care of me. I feel such gratitude for that. And so it just comes back to each and every one of us taking individual responsibility to do our part to slow the spread of this virus, to not put that workload on our healthcare workers. They're already overworked as is. So you're right, they've got to be feeling at a breaking point. But it's also about each and every one of us, whether you have COVID and you want to be able to get the quality of treatment you need, or you have other health emergencies that arise and you're going to need to rely on those healthcare workers. It's dangerous to all of us to have the healthcare system overtaxed like it is. I have another close friend of mine who is in the hospital right now with COVID. He is also over the age of 60 and has had a really bad case. And so just last weekend, they put him on a ventilator. And he's struggling. When you go on a ventilator, they sedate you and you're in a medically induced coma, and he's struggling. It sounds like now he's starting to get better, but it's a long road. It's going to be a long road to recovery for him, and there may be lasting impacts. And again, you just don't know what impact it's going to have on you or a loved one or a neighbor or a coworker or a friend. And so I would just say, again, we should take this seriously. Fortunately, the remedies that our governor has advised us are pretty simple, minor inconveniences that can, it's not going to protect us 100%. If you are at risk, I would encourage you to take even more precautions. But if you, like me, are healthy and aren't really as worried about it, just do your part to slow the spread of the virus for other people who don't want it prevalent and to increase their risk of exposure.
And it's really that simple. Yeah, it might be inconvenient, but wearing a mask makes sure that 104-year-old lady with whom you've got this great friendship, she's less at risk because you've inconvenienced yourself a little bit. It's worth a little inconvenience to make sure you get to be around awesome people like her.
That's right. Well, and you just do the math. You look at the risk of transmission of this virus, and it is higher than the flu. It's not 100% of everybody who's within 6 feet of you is going to get it, but it is certainly more transmissible than the flu. A lot of that's probably because it has such a longer incubation period. So you can be contagious and not have symptoms for days. And so in that point, your guard is let down maybe, and if you're not wearing a mask, you're out there spreading the virus, and some people are going to get it. And if you do the math of exponential growth, and if I have it and I infect 3 people, and those 3 people infect 3 people, then that's, I've infected 12 people. And if those 12 infect another 3, pretty quickly, it's over the course of a couple of weeks, you've infected tens of thousands of people through your lack of care. And I just think we can do better than that. Now, the flu is more of a, maybe 1.1, 1.2 people who are going to get infected by the flu. The math on that is not quite the same exponential growth curve, but this is more contagious than the flu, and it is riskier than the flu. So just take the simple precautions that people advise us. And I think as Utahns, we're this ruggedness of the West. We take responsibility for our actions. We believe in self-reliance. Let's make the right decisions here.
I agree 100%. Simple things. Wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance.
Yeah.
Tough as it might be. But that just comes down to the base of what I've seen of what you've done in all of your work in politics is your concern for other people. You with the homeless in Salt Lake County, and then recently with your efforts with the suicide hotline.
Yeah. So, I think taking care of, helping people to help themselves is something that has always been important to me. And I've seen people who, given the opportunities, when the doors are open to them, can pull themselves up and walk through those doors. And for too many people, those doors are never open. But I'll start with maybe my own experience. I talked a little bit about coming from a family where, my family didn't have a lot of personal financial means, and we struggled as kids. And our parents, I remember times where our electricity was shut off, and my mom struggling to explain to us why we didn't have power at home. And our church stepped in and helped to get the electricity turned back on. I remember a couple of times that our home was in foreclosure proceedings, and again, we had help from family and neighbors to help us get through those difficult times. My mom she had Crohn's disease, so a chronic illness that at the time it was difficult to treat too. They've developed better treatments today, but it was expensive. And so medically speaking, my family was, my father, before my parents divorced, my father was often unemployed, and sometimes our family lacked health insurance. And that was really scary for my mom, who had a pre-existing condition. My sister was a diabetic. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 4. And so our family had a couple of people with pre-existing conditions. It was always scary when we lost health insurance and what might happen in those times when we didn't have health insurance. So we struggled. And, fortunately though, my mother, I said she was a school teacher. She taught 6th grade. When all 6 of us kids were at home, she took time off. But when my youngest sibling started school, she went back to teaching. And so we did have some better stability then with health insurance and income, but to raise 6 kids on a school teacher salary, we didn't have a lot. And but some things that I did get from my mom is a love of learning and reading. She always made that a priority, that we read and learn. And she always wanted me to go to college. And so I remember applying for college and getting accepted, but I wasn't sure how I would pay for it. And so I, throughout most of my college, was working 2, sometimes 3 jobs at a time to pay tuition, to pay my expenses. I lived at home most of the time, but had a car payment and gas that I needed to pay, car insurance, and then tuition and books and everything. It was expensive. It was hard to make ends meet. But fortunately for me, I qualified for Pell Grants, low-income grants, to help pay for my college expenses, partially at least. And then also Stafford loans, the subsidized low income, low interest, I should say, student loans that helped also to make college an option for me. It didn't make it easy. I still had to struggle and work multiple jobs at the same time, but it made it, the door was open and I was able to walk through it. And so it's always been a priority for me to make sure that doors are open for people. You know, nothing is free in life and nothing's easy. But if people are willing to sacrifice and work hard for themselves, that they're met with an opportunity, with doors that are open for them, that they can get ahead in life. And I think I'm so lucky because doors were open for me. I think it's important to make sure that doors are open for other people. And I think that's also just a smart thing to do for a society. We want a better educated population, a population that's able to provide and take care of themselves and not reliant upon government. So do what we can to open doors and allow people to lift themselves up. So, you know, my personal experience with that was I was able to, you know, and happy that and lucky that I had some doors that were open, but it also was a lot of hard work. But when I was mayor, we were facing challenges with addiction and homelessness, and I knew that we couldn't incarcerate our way out of addiction. That you know, you take somebody who has an addiction, maybe behavioral health or mental health issues, and you put them in jail, as you know, oftentimes, because a lot of times what goes along with addiction is shoplifting, some petty crimes, vagrancy, homelessness, and so, you know, you try to arrest your way out of that by arresting people for jaywalking or, you know, I think we should always enforce the law. But if the only remedy is to put them in jail where they stay for 3 to 5 days and then they're released from jail, they come back out, not really, their addiction isn't over. They're probably even more desperate to get a hit. And sometimes they have connections to better do it, better to be better criminals or connected to gangs and other criminal enterprises. And so jail sometimes was making the issue worse. And I'm not saying we shouldn't hold people accountable to the law. We definitely should. But what we said, and this was, you know, I was working with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and other leaders to say there's got to be a better way than just a revolving door through the jail. So we developed some treatment options and we actually expanded behavioral health treatment, doubled the size of treatment options in Salt Lake County, and then said to people when they were picked up for crimes that if they were ready to turn their life around, we would have a treatment bed ready for them to get treatment. And many hundreds of people took this option where they went into drug treatment and were able to get back on their feet. Then we helped them find jobs and find housing. And many of them today are employed, paying taxes, buying homes, certainly not relying on government for anything, but back on their feet. And really what it took was a short-term intervention that opened doors for them to allow them to now be on their own. And I just think that that's so important to make sure that we think about things in a smart way and a compassionate way, that the doors are open for people so they can help themselves.
You know, and I look at all of that. I look at taking care of people that way, but then also, you know, the same thing, investing a little bit to produce a much longer lasting result. I have a friend, Nathan, who served 2 tours, if I'm not mistaken, in Iraq. And, you know, he has lingering medical problems, but he's reticent to go to the VA because he doesn't want to take away from other soldiers who served. And where we have Camp Williams in our area as part of our district, I'm sure that is on your mind, taking care of our servicemen. And I mean, I know I saw the one that you did where you helped the gentleman receive his Purple Heart, finally. But I'm sure that that's not the only way you're trying to help with all of the armed forces.
Yeah, well, it is a tragedy that men and women put their lives on the line for our freedom. They serve in the armed forces, they serve abroad, and we are so grateful for their service and what they do, the freedoms they protect and the service they give to us. But then they come home and far too often they're forgotten. it's maybe hard for them to find a job. It's hard for them to adjust to life back home. They have these incredible leadership skills and actually practical job skills, but to translate that to a job back home, they can fix a Black Hawk helicopter, but they can't fix an automobile. And far too often we leave them on their own, and I think they deserve better than that from us. And so it's always been a priority of mine to support those who have supported us, who have put their lives on the line for our safety and security and our freedoms, that when they come back home, they find that we are a grateful nation that supports them in their transition. And so it's, some of my work when I was mayor to help our veterans start small businesses or to receive job training so that they can transition those incredible skills they have that they've developed in their military service, transition that to an employable skill that's going to help them back home to succeed. But in the last couple of years, one of the issues that I feel very strongly about and have been working hard on is the issue of veteran suicide. So we know that suicide, sadly, is an epidemic, and it's the #1 cause of death in Utah for youth ages 18 to 25. It is so much more prevalent among our veterans. I think it's 3 times more likely for a veteran to die by suicide than the general population, which is already high. And so, some of that is probably some of the PTSD, the trauma that they may have experienced in their military service. It may be just a difficulty adjusting to life back home and feelings of loneliness and helplessness. And, there was a time in their life where they literally were doing so much abroad in military service, and they come back home and they feel forgotten. And so, the risk of suicide among our veterans is inexcusably high. And so it's been a priority of mine to support our veterans, to give them the resources they need to succeed back home, and to get at the heart of what's this veteran suicide epidemic, to lower suicide levels among our veterans to save their lives. And I stood with a veteran, Chris, just a few weeks ago when we were talking about the legislation that I passed to address veteran suicide. And he said that he did several tours of duty in Iraq as well, and that he has more friends, more associates from his military service who have died by suicide than died in service in Iraq. And that's inexcusable. And I think as a grateful nation, we must do more to protect the lives of our veterans. And so it's a priority of mine, and something that I think, again, it's also bipartisan. My legislation passed with every bill that I've introduced and has had a Republican co-sponsor, but this one worked with my colleague, Representative Anthony Gonzalez out of Ohio, a Republican, and we were able to get this bill passed and through the Senate and signed by the president. And I hope that it will save lives, especially for people to whom we are so indebted, those military veterans who risk everything to keep us safe.
I have a large number of my neighbors that are actually posted with Camp Williams, and so I've gotten to watch them as they deal with PTSD and with depression, because you take them from this tight-knit framework of brothers and a job that they know how to do, and you cut them loose. And what do they have? They're spinning in the wind. So I'm glad to see that we're doing more for these fine men and women who are doing their best to help our country, to help other countries. And if they put their lives on the line for us, we should do a little to help them, I think. So I'm glad to know that we've got good support across the country, Ohio as well, right? So that's most of the way to the other coast.
Yeah.
I think about all that, and I think about growing up here in Utah. My family are dairy farmers up in Midway, right? My wife's got family that's down in San Pete, and ranchers on all sides of the family. And so here are all these folks that have been out there tending cattle out in the air. And so when I heard that they were talking about renewing nuclear testing, I just about died, because I lost an uncle, or a great uncle rather, and then his son as well. And then I found out today, actually, that my great grandmother had cancer in her leg, probably because she was outside when they were doing the open air testing. And so I'm looking at that and just thinking, how can we do that? So when I heard that you were actively taking a stance against that, I mean, it's ridiculous that you should have to, but thank you for doing that.
Yeah, this was something that was so alarming to me. So, and so many Utahns understand this history. I grew up here and have, like you, Daniel, friends who or neighbors or who either lost a loved one from cancer, from being downwind from these tests, or otherwise impacted. But I think there are a lot of people maybe who were born after this and may not know, or who maybe moved here. So if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of rehash a little bit of the history and then then talk about my work. But so
Certainly.
in the in the aftermath of World War II, of course, we all know the United States developed a nuclear bomb, and after that, we realized this is something that we wanted to test and to develop more nuclear weapons, understand this better. And initially, we were testing nuclear weapons on remote islands in the South Pacific. Our government felt that that was not secure enough, that other nations could observe it. You had spy planes and other things that were coming, that technology. So they wanted something within the continental United States that they could protect their secrecy and around these nuclear weapons tests. So they started searching for a nuclear weapons test site. And they settled on the Nevada test site right now, which is the primary location for testing nuclear weapons in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. The last nuclear weapon test happened in 1992. And during that time period, the United States government tested over 1,000 nuclear bombs that were orders of magnitude larger than the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so at the time they were being tested, people were concerned about what might happen. And so the federal government actually reassured Utahns. I've heard stories from people who said they got brochures in the mail that said, there's nothing to worry about. These tests are safe. No reason for concern. Even told people to go out and go out with your family and watch the mushroom cloud. You can have a picnic on the bluffs in St. George and watch these nuclear weapons, the mushroom cloud from the explosion, and make a day of it. And all the while, our government knew that what radioactive fallout was, and that it would pose a risk to human life, and they covered it up. And there are memos that were uncovered. Really, a lot of this work uncovering this and helping to expose our own government's lies around these nuclear weapons tests was done by Orrin Hatch and Congressman Wayne Owens, a Republican and a Democrat, who put this on the forefront of the work that they wanted to do. And they uncovered even a memo that advised the test site to never test a nuclear weapon if the wind was blowing south or west, because they didn't want nuclear fallout to blow into Las Vegas or Southern California. But they called Utah this was the words of a bureaucrat, a low-use segment of the population, that it was acceptable risk if the nuclear fallout was blowing toward Utah. And so they were telling us it was safe, and nothing to be afraid of. All the while, they knew that it was wrong. They lied to us, and they were taking risks with lives of people in Utah. So what started happening is there were flocks of sheep that died after a test, and other things that we started seeing, cluing in that something might be wrong here with these tests. And tens of thousands of Utahns got cancer and died. Many people were infertile, had other health consequences from this fallout. And it was in the 80s and 90s that we started understanding the depth of our government's lies and the impact that was having on people right here in Utah. So they passed what was called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. All these families are stuck with expensive medical bills because of our government's negligence and lies. And they provided compensation for that. So really as a result of the work of Ronald Reagan with nuclear test bans. So in 1963, above ground nuclear weapons tests were banned. So what they started doing at that point is doing below ground nuclear weapons tests. They were less dangerous, but make no mistake, they were dangerous, and people have died because of fallout caused by below ground nuclear weapons tests that happened after 1963 when above ground were banned. And President Reagan started pushing for nuclear test ban treaties to ban nuclear testing. George H.W. Bush, and then finally we got this in place, and the last test happened, as I said, in 1993. And we have not tested any nuclear weapons since then. I've talked to nuclear weapons experts around the country about, so I was alarmed when I started hearing over the course of the last year that the Trump administration has a plan to restart nuclear weapons testing, that they want to resume these nuclear weapons. And so I asked nuclear experts if this was something that was necessary. We still have so many nuclear warheads that they do subcritical tests. This means without exploding them, they make sure that they work and that they're satisfactory, and that they've certified that our arsenal is adequate and that it is functional, and that there's no reason to test our nuclear weapons because we have what we need. Not only that, but the United States has tested more nuclear bombs than any other country in the world. So we already have a significant information advantage. So if the United States, goes back down this road of testing nuclear weapons, what's going to happen is you're going to see China and Russia and even North Korea, Iran, other countries testing nuclear weapons, which will have a devastating impact on humanity, as you see fallout happening around the globe, but and environmentally. But the risk then of nuclear, increasing nuclear armament and nuclear war is what's scary to me as well. And we are still downwind from the United States nuclear weapons test site. So when I saw the Trump plan to restart nuclear weapons testing, and I know that it is not necessary and probably puts Utahns at risk, but it probably puts our national security at risk to go down that path again, I knew that was something that we had to stop. And so I raised the alarm bell, started working with my colleagues in Nevada. Is also, the representatives from Nevada are very concerned about this. New Mexico, a lot of the uranium was mined out of New Mexico. So you have a lot of largely Native American populations who were exposed to radiation then. And so a lot of people who were concerned, and what we know now is that radiation didn't just stop in Utah, but it went all the way up to Montana, went west into Wyoming. And so the exposure was broad. And so I've been working with people who are also concerned, and I introduced an amendment to the National Defense Bill over the summer that would prohibit the use of tax dollars. So essentially a ban on restarting nuclear weapons testing. But what concerns me, so I was successful in getting that into the House bill. What concerns me is there's Senate legislation right now that has millions of dollars appropriated to invest in the nuclear weapon, the Nevada test site, to prepare it to restart nuclear weapons testing. And the Department of Defense has said that they can be ready to go within a matter of months. So this is something that concerns me because I know the Utah history. I lived the Utah history and have so many people who were impacted by what happened from the 1950s through 1993. And we can't let that happen again. And I think I would say, again, this is probably a point of stark distinction in the congressional race between myself and Burgess Owens, who, when Burgess Owens was asked if he supported the Trump plan to restart nuclear weapons testing, his response was, and you can listen to the audio because it's the Salt Lake Tribune and others have reported on this. His response was, absolutely, we need to support everything President Trump wants to do in that arena. So, for me, this is really alarming. And, the commitment that I give is I will always put Utah first. And I'm not going to hesitate to work across the aisle, to build bridges, to get stuff done. But also, if it means standing alone, I will do that and stand for Utah and to protect Utah. And then I will build coalitions around me of Republicans and Democrats to stand up for what's important to our state. And I think you can't get a more clear example and distinction than what's happening with nuclear weapons testing.
And it's truly alarming, especially where we have so many more people living here. And the fact that we know for a fact that the radiation didn't even just stop in the planes. I read this the other day. The manufacturers like Kodak and others had to actually stop production of their film on certain days when they knew that testing was happening. They knew, and we weren't told.
Yeah. And what we know now today from scientists who have looked at this is that fallout, it wasn't just rural Utah. It was certainly worse the closer you were to the test site, but contamination in Utah County, Salt Lake County, Davis County, it just depended on the wind patterns. Sometimes this nuclear fallout went up into the stratosphere. There was an exposure in New York State from one of the nuclear tests because of just the way the wind patterns went, and a lot of people there developed cancer. So the risks are high, intolerably high, in my opinion. It's something that we absolutely must stop.
Yes. There's so many problems in the world, and so many things that we can talk about that I know, excuse me, that I know is important for you, just because you are here for Utahns. That's something that I've always come away with when I've been able to talk with you, and I count myself lucky to have had many interactions with you over the course of your entire first campaign and then your first 2 years in office. But I know you care about Utahns. I know you're thinking about the coal miners down in Carbon County who are facing a change in their family business that has been their family business for generations. But they're going to have to change. And how do we help them? How do we facilitate them having choices instead of just losing everything?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to first of all respect that some of the careers that people have built their lives around, and the hard work that they've provided for their family and built a future for themselves, and what they've contributed to our state, but also recognize that circumstances are changing. So I think as we see that transition happening gradually, things like economic development in parts of rural Utah, expanding broadband, which has been a priority of mine, to take broadband into rural parts of our state and rural parts of the country so that opportunities will follow broadband. But also, Utah has a large natural gas energy, and natural gas is so much cleaner and has so much less greenhouse gas emissions than coal and petroleum, that as we see our energy mix transition gradually, natural gas, I think, has to be part of that portfolio until ultimately we'll get technology and science will get us to the point that we as a society have clean renewable energy, but that transition is not going to happen overnight. We have to recognize that it's going to happen gradually, and I think natural gas is part of that transition. But also, I think Utah is, and can even be to a greater extent, a place where clean energy is also a major part of our economy. And we take those jobs into rural Utah as we are looking at wind and solar and the skilled labor that's needed to in those jobs. And as Utah becomes I think a source of renewable energy for not only here in Utah, but other states, I think this can be a new source of jobs and economy for states, for parts of our state that are seeing this transition affect them and their families.
And we have one of those prime examples that I can guarantee you pretty much everyone in District 4 has seen, and it's those windmills at the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I look at all that, and I'm glad that we have you who is aware of the variety of people you represent, because you're not just representing populous Utah County and populous Salt Lake County. You're representing all sorts of different walks of life. Max, the cattle farmer, my family, the dairy farmers, if they were in your district, you'd represent them just as well, right? Because you're here for us and you're here to listen. And that was one of the things I loved the most. Is the first thing you did in office was set up town halls so that you could listen to us, who had felt ignored for years before. we're hitting the end of our time, and I don't want to keep you from your family or anything else you've got going. I know you're working hard on the campaign, and I know Julie and the kids probably don't see you very often, but in the last couple of minutes we have, what is something you have wanted to say to your constituents here, and a promise, an outlook, what's something you wanted to share with us that maybe you just haven't had the right venue to do?
Well, thank you. You talk about this district that I represent, and I like to say, so my title, I'm Representative Ben McAdams as a member of the United States Congress. So my title is representative, but more than that, that is my job description, to represent the people who elected me. And it doesn't matter if they voted for me or voted against me. My job is to work for them. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or unaffiliated or independent. I am your representative. And so for me, I take that very seriously. And it's a priority to listen, to receive input and feedback, and to do the best that I can. With representing 800,000 people, there's always going to be someone who disagrees with the decision I make. I hope people understand that my priority is to listen to you, to try to forge consensus, to explain maybe my rationale and thinking on why I've taken a certain position that I have. And, you're not going to agree with me all the time. And it's kind of funny if you look sometimes at my social media, I'm constantly being criticized for not being liberal enough and for being not conservative enough, or too liberal or too conservative. And it's kind of a ping pong between all sides. And for me, it's important that I want people to know that I listen, that I care, and that I will do my best to represent our district. And I'm going to make mistakes. You're not going to agree with every decision I make, but I hope people know that my desire to serve is what motivates me. I love this state that we live. I love this country. We are so lucky to live in the United States of America, and all the freedoms that we enjoy. And essentially, I was raised with a sense of pride and patriotism and gratitude for being born in the United States of America. And I want to, I was also taught that where much is given, much is expected. And I want to be somebody who gives back and helps to preserve what we love about this country, and to join in the pursuit to make us a more perfect union. We've come a long way. We've made mistakes as a country, but we've come a long way. I think we still have more that we can do as we work to open doors and to make sure that all Americans have access to the opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of, that I hope that each of us want our kids to be able to have access to. And I think we got more work to do, and I'm committed to doing that work and to listening to people, to being their representative, and doing everything I can to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to pursue the American dream.
I don't think you could have said it any better. Well, I appreciate you taking time with us tonight. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to actually talk for so long with my congressman. And it's nice to know that you have our district's best interests at heart. And I agree. I don't always agree with the choices you make, but I know why you're doing it, because I know that my neighbors probably like it better when you make that choice on that particular issue. And I'm okay with that, because you're doing your best to find that middle ground. And I'll tell you, that is why you have swayed my neighbor, who was a dyed-in-the-wool going to the state Republican convention delegate, who's now unaffiliated and voting for you.
Oh, well, thank you.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you for being here with us. Ben McAdams is a wonderful man, and I'm sure that if you had any questions that you wanted answered that weren't answered, I'm sure that if you got it to his campaign staff and to his office, he'd be more than happy to answer that. And moreover, as he's been saying recently on social media, if you have an issue that's coming up that is just government bureaucratic red tape, he will help you. I've seen him do it with so many people, and that's what he's here for. He's here for us. And that's why I'm voting for you as well. So thanks for being with us, and thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. And we wish you all well.